Hello, my name is Charity Wottrich, and today we are diving into the topic of what is God's response to anxiety? Yes, I am sunburned. I went to Big Bend this past weekend with my husband and forgot to wear sunscreen, so let this be a warning to you all as it is summer approaching, especially Austin is like basically already summer, so wear sunscreen. That's all. Okay, now we addressed it. We can move past it. So, as many of y'all know, I am working on a devotional book for people who struggle with anxiety. I've been in the Word a lot over the past few years with my struggle, and I cannot understate the importance of Scripture and prayer for anxiety. I am not saying you shouldn't take medication, I'm not saying you shouldn't do counseling. Absolutely not. I'm a huge advocate of using those other forms of God's common grace, but I'm just saying, Scripture is so crucial. It has been wonderful in helping me have peace, giving me grounding, helping me to internalize truths about who God is and who I am. I have come ready to fire out some scripture, so I hope you are ready. If you're struggling with anxiety or you know somebody who is struggling with anxiety, this video should be helpful for you. I want to address a stigma around a certain scripture that is 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. This verse is not about the state of an anxious person, especially since nobody can be perfect in this lifetime. The only person who was perfect was Jesus, and that's why he was able to pay our debt as sinners, because he was perfect. The verse previous to this one actually is talking about judgment. So this verse is more about the fact that we don't have to fear the eternal wrath of God. If you are thinking that you are a bad Christian because you have anxiety, think again. God uses people in the Bible who have weaknesses, people who are scared. It's not something that you will be condemned for. So I just want to encourage you as we go into these verses and see God's response to anxiety. I think you'll find that God is not angry or going to condemn you because you have anxiety. If no Christian was ever going to have fear, how come it says so many times in scripture, do not be afraid? Like, he wouldn't be saying, God wouldn't say it if it wasn't something we needed to hear over and over again because it's part of our nature. Having fear is a natural human response. Even Jesus, for fear of sounding blasphemous, Jesus himself had fear. It's not the same thing as anxiety, but they're cut from the same cloth. Luke 22:44 says, "And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground." That is somebody who is very scared. And so I just want you to know this. It's not wrong for you to feel fear. Because of the fall, our emotions have become distorted, and sometimes we fear things that we don't need to fear. The human response is you see something, that response is made to protect you from circumstances, but anxiety is a distorted version of fear where we're fearing things that we don't need to be fearing. I'm going to dive in now to a few responses that God has to anxiety. First, I have Jesus saying in Matthew 6:28 to 29, "And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." Then I have before Jesus' crucifixion, his disciples were worried about what was going to take place because Jesus was basically telling them what was happening, and they're like, "Whoa, no, that can't be. What are you talking about?" And this is where Peter is like, "Oh, I'm gonna go with you even to death." And Jesus is like, "Oh, you're gonna deny me 3 times." This is right around that time. Jesus says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am you may be also, and you know the way to where I am going. John 14:1-4. And again, when Jesus appeared to the disciples in a locked room after the resurrection, when they thought they were seeing a ghost because, hello, their friend just died, and even though he said he was going to be resurrected, they, were obviously doubting, and they see him, they think he's a ghost. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." Luke 24:38-39. In 1 Peter 5:7, after Christ is resurrected and after the Great Commission, all of that, Peter is writing to the church and says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you." From these verses, we can see that God's response to anxiety is patience and truth. Jesus asks his disciples rhetorical questions of why they are afraid, reminding them of the truth. He reminds them of his promises, he reminds them of his presence. And that's a pattern that we see all throughout Scripture in many more instances than what I shared with you. If I shared you all those verses, this would be like, I don't know, an hour-long video. And as it is, I'm already trying to cut it down to a shorter length, and I'm terrible at it. So I couldn't share more than that, but I just want you to really take that to heart. God is going to respond to you with truth and with patience. It's going to be a long process. I know for me, this has been my experience. In the Word, I find so much truth, and it takes so much time for me to really internalize that because my anxieties feel so powerful. But as I read Scripture, those anxieties get crushed under the weight of the truth because the truth is so much more powerful than my fear. If you have a loved one who struggles with anxiety, I encourage you to show the same kind of attitude that God shows towards his children who struggle with anxiety. That means being patient with them, loving them, and sharing with them the truth. Share with them that God is with them, that you're with them. Remind them of where they are and their situation. Remind them of the biblical truths and pray with them. Seriously, I love it when my husband prays with me when I am anxious because I know that he is helping me voice that prayer to God. When I'm so anxious, it's hard for me to articulate the way that I'm feeling. It feels like he's interceding for me in a way that I can't in that moment, and I love that. So if you can do those things for somebody who's anxious, I'm sure that they'll appreciate it if they're anything like me, if their struggle is anything similar. So I just encourage you, if you know somebody who's struggling, to respond in patience and truth. With that, this has been God's response to anxiety. I hope it was helpful for you, whether you are struggling with anxiety yourself or whether you know somebody who is, or a mixture of both. If you are interested in the devotional book that I'm writing for people who struggle with anxiety, the way to learn more about that would be to jump on my email list where I share about every week right now. And with that, my name is Charity Wottrich. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe, and I will see you next week.